Welcome back to the Flying with the Flock podcast, the easiest place to get all your Eagles and NFL related news. I'm your host, Matt, and welcome to episode 7 of this crazy and insane podcast. Uh, I just again wanted to thank you guys for stopping in this week and just listening to what I have to say. It means a lot. So, to further show your support, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Uh, with all that, with all the pleasantries out of the way, let's hop straight into it with this past weekend's Eagles game, which was the Eagles versus the Bengals. So, fun fact that I didn't know until the game started is that the Eagles have never won in Cincinnati, ever. In its close to 100-year history, more like 90-year history, but we have never won in Cincinnati, which kind of surprised me. We've had a couple of chances with the McNabb forgot that they can tie game back in the late 2000s. But besides that, we've never really played that well against the Bengals, and our all-time record was 3-9-2, which it's surprising that we have two ties with somebody that's not a division rival. But hey, I guess it is what it is. But looking at this game, it was the first half was tight. It was really tight, but once we got into the second half, our momentum carried from the final touchdown drive of the first half. It carried over, and then we kind of just ran away with it a little bit. Uh, Looking at the Bengals first, Joe Burrow, not a horrible day. He went 26 for 37, 234 yards, a touchdown, and an interception, which I will get to that interception in a bit. On the ground, they really didn't help Joe Burrow at all. They were hyping up the Sidney Brown Chase Brown matchup because the Eagles always have to have some form of a brother matchup to make sure that it's popular in the NFL. I don't know. I don't really personally care about it, but Chase Brown had 12 carries for 32 yards and a touchdown. Joe Burrow had 3 carries for 15 yards, and Zach Moss was really quiet. I expected him to play a bigger role as a more of a power back. Uh, he had 5 carries for 11 yards. Both running backs averaged less than 3 yards a carry. Obviously, Joe Burrow averaged 5 yards a carry, but he really shouldn't have to be carrying this running game for the Bengals. Looking at the receiving, obviously one of the big talks before the game was whether T. Higgins was going to be in or out of this game, and he ended up having to sit out due to a quad injury, which definitely hurt a lot of fantasy managers there that were expecting a bigger day of T. Higgins and Jamar Chase challenging the Q Slay show on the outside. Their top receiver was Mike Gesicki, who had 7 receptions for 73 yards. He was really hurting the Eagles, especially when Joe Burrow was escaping the pocket and extending the plays. He just kept finding Mike Gesicki for first downs after first downs after first downs. Surprisingly, Jamar Chase had more receptions than him, though, with 9 receptions for 54 yards and a touchdown. Again, the touchdown came off of a scramble drill. I forget who he caught it on. It might have been Slay. No, it was Nolan Smith. That's who it was. Nolan Smith was back in coverage for some reason against Jamar Chase, and Jamar just can jump higher than an outside linebacker. So he was able to bring that down. On top of that, they still had a couple more receivers. Jermaine Burton, 1 reception for 41 yards. Eric All Jr., 2 receptions for 32 yards, and Zach Moss, for as much as I bash him in the rushing game, he did help them out a little bit in the receiving with 4 receptions for 28 yards. And Chase Brown had 2 receptions for 2 yards. That's okay. Uh, Andre Yoshiv, I just call him Yoshi, alright, so don't bash me for my pronunciation, but Yoshi went 0 for 0. He laid goose eggs when he really probably should have tried to step up in the absence of T. Higgins. Overall, this Bengals team really made Joe Burrow try to play Superman in this game, and that's not how you're going to beat the Eagles or most other highly ranked NFL teams. You can't just try to hope that they're just going to lay down and not play physical and just let one of your players to try to ball out. This isn't 2022 anymore. And my prediction of Joe Burrow for MVP is starting to look worse and worse. He's definitely not winning comeback player of the year either. But yeah, uh, something's just weird about this Bengals team, man. They've been on a downfall ever since they lost to the Chiefs 2 years ago in the AFC Championship. Wow, that was 2 years ago. They lost to the Chiefs 2 years ago in the AFC Championship, and they haven't looked completely right since. Obviously, injuries doesn't help. Looking at their defense, nobody was able to get pressure on Jalen Hurts. Nobody got a sack. Nobody got an interception. Nobody got a forced fumble. The their leading tackler was Cam Taylor-Britt, and Sam Hubbard got a couple of tackles, but our offensive tackles were able to shut down their edge rushers, which are actually pretty good edge rushers. Sam Hubbard and Hendrickson are very highly touted in the NFL. So yeah, there's something weird about the Bengals, and probably later in the season, if things don't start to improve and they don't start to string some wins together, I might have to come back and talk about the possibility of how the Bengals might need to start shedding some pieces and start rebuilding, even though their window to win should be now, especially with Joe Burrow on a new contract. Even though it's a lot of money they have to shell out, I believe T. Higgins and Jamar Chase aren't on full guaranteed contracts yet, so it's just slightly concerning to me. Looking at the Eagles, though, it was a really solid day for Jalen Hurts. 16 for 20, 236 yards and a passing touchdown, and he had 3 rushing touchdowns on the day, 10 carries for 37 yards. Not all those rushing touchdowns came from the brotherly shove either. I believe one was like a 15 or 10-yard rushing play. He scrambled out. Oh no, it was an option play. My bad. It was an option play. Uh, it was a quarterback keeper. He went up to the right side and just plug walked straight into the end zone. So that was a solid read by Jalen right there, and he keeps on just getting rushing touchdowns. I believe now he holds the most games for at least one passing touchdown and 3 rushing touchdowns. He's also third all time in quarterback rushing touchdowns, and he's becoming highly touted in the rushing game as well. So Jalen Hurts is starting to get his legs underneath of him. He's starting to play more confident, and this team is starting to look more confident because they're just following the lead of their quarterback. Saquon Barkley on the ground, 22 yards, 22 carries for 108 yards, no touchdowns. He probably should have had one of the touchdowns. I don't see why we can't run the brotherly shove with Saquon at quarterback and just get him some rushing touchdowns, but that's besides the point. Kenneth Gainwell, for as bad as I thought he was last year, and for me writing him off, especially with us getting Saquon, he's looked pretty good when we're up in these games and we need to give Saquon a break. He's looked good when he's carried the ball and caught the ball as well. We even got to a point where we brought in Will Shipley, who had 2 carries for -3 yards. Honestly, he should have had that last touchdown at the end of the game. If you're at a blowout, don't call like a meaningless, barely holding call. Just let the rookie get his first touchdown in a regular season game. It would have been so cool, but the refs called it back because It's the NFL, the no fun league, so you gotta figure. In receiving, Devontae Smith led us with 6 receptions for 85 yards and a touchdown. The touchdown was beautiful. It was a beautiful pass from Hurts. He read it well. He saw that the safeties vacated the deep zones and came to the midfield kind of, and Devontae Smith was matched up with a linebacker that was dropping into a deeper zone. Uh, it was probably the perfect read, perfect pass, and perfect catch from those two. It was nice to see Smitty get going a little bit. Um, they tried to force feed him early in the game because last week there's a lot of talks about, oh, Devontae Smith only had one catch for -2 yards. It doesn't matter. As long as you just fluidly and naturally get the ball, it shouldn't even matter what your stats are. All right. In this game, we naturally fed Devontae Smith the ball in the second half, and he looked a lot better, and so did Jalen Hurts. A.J. Brown, 5 receptions for 84 yards, no touchdowns. Grant Calcaterra keeps showing up every week with 3 receptions for 58 yards. Saquon Barkley had 1 reception for 3 yards. So our offense looked pretty good. As I mentioned before, the offensive tackles, even the backup of Fred Johnson, played really well. They never really put too much pressure on Hurts, which allowed him to deliver concise and good balls wherever he wanted to. And Hurts just looked a lot better. He played more confident. He delivered the balls more naturally, especially in the second half. In the first, a lot of the play calls were like forcing Hurts to throw in certain areas, which I didn't like. Allow Hurts to figure out what he prefers during the game. Don't force him to play a certain way. If he wants to run more, let him run more. If he wants to pass more, let him figure out where he wants to pick apart this defense. Uh, Middle of the field was definitely better this game. Maybe next game it's going to be down the sideline. Maybe the next game it's going to be mostly screen passes. And he doesn't have to throw for 30 plus passes every game. Just let him throw between 15 to 20 passes per game and let him do the rest of the damage with his legs. This defense is also starting to wake up, especially coming out of this bye. The past 3 games have looked amazing for this defense. We got some. Oh, I guess we did. It looks like Nolan Smith and Milton Williams both had half of a sack when it came to getting to Joe Burrow, but other than that, we didn't really have anything else. C.J. Gardner-Johnson had a spectacular interception. Him and Isaiah Rodgers were both heading up. Isaiah Rodgers was covering Ja'Marr Chase. Joe Burrow threw up a prayer, and Isaiah Rodgers batted down the ball into C.J. Gardner's hands. That was very nice. Again, our linebackers, Zach Bond and Nakobe Dean, are both looking stellar. They're playing physical, and they're playing smart. Let's see. Cooper DeJean, also playing very physical. He's not afraid to get his hands dirty and get in there, make the tackle in open field, and use his weight against the receiver or the running back. I believe, what's his face? Quinyon Mitchell also almost had an interception in this game again. Hopefully next week is the week because I'll be at that game, and I pray that Quinyon Mitchell will make the interception during that game. Other than that, everything looked pretty good. Especially in the second half, we were striking on all cylinders. So I can't really complain. This is a good win against a good team. And even though that the media will continue to probably say for the next few weeks the Eagles are okay of a football team, they're much better than some of their division rivals and their conference rivals, which we'll get into the standings in a little bit. But there are some suspect teams that are like in the lead of their division that it's like if the Eagles were in that division, we probably would be running away with it right now. Okay, so with that recap and implications being done, let's look at this past weekend's game, starting out with Thursday Night Football, which ended on a really controversial call, which we'll get into in a second. The Rams' offense looked fairly efficient. Matthew Stafford went 25 for 34, 279 yards, 4 touchdowns, and an interception. Looked fairly confident, and he played pretty well. The one interception, I believe, was like a ball that was batted up, so it wasn't even like a horrible pass. Their rushing game, Kyren Williams really carried them. 23 carries for 98 or 97 yards, no touchdowns. Blake Corum was the next closest one, but it wasn't even close. He had 4 carries for 9 yards. So, yeah. Uh, Looking at the receiving, Puka Nacua led receiving. I believe this was his first game back, which was good for fantasy managers. He had 7 receptions for 106 yards, no touchdowns. But his counterpart, Cooper Kupp, had 5 receptions for 51 yards and a touchdown. Demarcus Robinson, 2 receptions for 35 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Kyren Williams, through the air, had 5 receptions, 19 yards, and a touchdown. This team, when healthy, is a dangerous team to anybody in the NFL, in my opinion. And I said that earlier. I said that earlier in the season, that if this team can stay healthy, they're going to win games against good teams. This defense, let's see. They did pressure Sam Darnold a bit. Jared Verse and Byron Young both had a sack apiece. We'll talk about the Byron Young sack in a minute here. But yeah, overall, when this team plays confident and when they're healthy, they can beat almost anybody in the NFL. On the Vikings side, Sam Darnold didn't have a horrible game himself. He went 18 for 25, 240 yards, and 2 touchdowns. His rushing really didn't alleviate any stress on him. Aaron Jones had 19 carries for 58 yards. Not great. He averaged 3 yards per carry, so that's not really where you want to be. You would hope a running back like Aaron Jones would have 19 carries and around 80 yards, maybe 90 yards, but it definitely didn't help alleviate any stress put on Sam Darnold during this game. Receiving, obviously, Justin Jefferson led the team with eight receptions for 115 yards, 0 touchdowns. Other than that, Sam Darnold really spread out the ball a bit. Aaron Jones was the next highest receiver with 2 receptions for 37 yards. Josh Oliver had 2 receptions for 30 yards, and Jordan Addison had 2 receptions for 22 yards. Defensively, they did have 1 turnover. It was Byron Murphy Jr. I believe I want to say, linebacker, I think. They really didn't get to Stafford either. I guess Stafford's O-line must have been able to hold up a bit more than usual. But yeah. And then to talk about the controversial call at the end of the game, the no face mask call I was watching the end of the game, and that was really bad there. There's been a lot of times that the refs don't call stuff. Obviously, going back into the 2019 playoffs, the no pass interference call from the Rams on the Saints, the holding call in Super Bowl 57 was pretty bad. Yeah, there's been a couple bad calls. This one was probably one of the worst. It was obvious that Sam Darnold's head was getting pulled around, and the refs just didn't throw the flag. It was on the sack or the safety of, I believe it was Byron Jones. Let me see, Byron Young. Yeah, it was on the sack from rookie Byron Young. And even after the play, they showed it, and he knew that he made a face mask, but they just didn't call that. So NFL needs to get it together. There's been a lot of big problems with the refs this season that we've covered on this podcast, going all the way back to week 1. But yeah, not amazing game. Obviously, if healthy, the Rams are going to be dangerous. The Vikings are now on like 2 games skid after going 5-0, so let's see if they can start to recoup and start getting some of their momentum back. Next up, we're going to another NFC North rival. We have the Green Bay Packers beating the Jacksonville Jaguars 30 to 27. The Jaguars played a lot better than I thought they would. Looking at their offense, Trevor Lawrence went 21 for 32, 308 yards, two touchdowns, and an interception. So the rushing game, Tank Bigsby being their main rusher because Travis Etienne is out. Um, Tank Bigsby went 18 carries for 78 yards, no touchdown, but he averaged around 4 yards per carry, which is really nice. Receiving, they got led by Brian Thomas Jr. with 3 receptions for 60 yards and a touchdown, followed by Brendan Strange, who must be one of their tight ends, who had 5 receptions for 59 yards, no touchdowns. Evan Ingram was a little bit quiet. He only had 4 receptions for 36 yards, but he also had a touchdown, so I guess that did help a little bit. And unfortunately, during the game, we found out after that Christian Kirk is going to be out for the rest of the season with a broken collarbone. He'll have to go undergo season-ending surgery, so that's really a bummer, especially for Jaguars fans. He had 2 receptions for 59 yards in the game, though. On defense, they didn't really sack the quarterback or force an interception. So, yeah, we're just looking at this offensive juggernaut here. I wouldn't even call them juggernauts. They're just efficient. They've been efficient the past 2 weeks. They're finding who they are. They lost to a good team. They fall to 2-6. So, uh, playoffs are looking more and more like less and less like a possibility and more like a dream. So, Trevor Lawrence, not a bad day. If they're forcing him to pass, eventually he's going to turn over the ball a lot. So, I guess that's just a wait and see what happens there. For the Packers, though, they really didn't play as well as they probably could have. Jordan Love went 14 for 22, 196 yards, and an interception. Uh, Eventually, he did get injured with a groin injury, and it's been rumored that they're just gonna hold him out until after their bye week, which is in 2 weeks. So, just in order to keep him healthy, especially while he's under that new contract. Malik Willis went 4 for 5, 56 yards and a touchdown. Looked all right. That's fairly good. He also rushed for 4 carries for 23 yards. So mainly he was efficient. He didn't turn over the ball, and he actually created some opportunities for touchdowns for his team. Josh Jacobs led the team in rushing with 25 carries for 127 yards and 2 touchdowns, averaged around 5 yards per carry. Uh, Looking at receiving, their top receiver was Tucker Kraft with 3 receptions for 78 yards and a touchdown. Romeo Doubs was next with 3 receptions for 72 yards, and Jaden Reed was right behind him with 2 receptions for 55 yards. It's definitely going to be interesting to see what happens to this Packers team, especially because they're going up against a red-hot Detroit team next week. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see what happens, especially with their starting quarterback being out. All right, so the next game we're going to be looking at, and I'm surprised I called this right. This was really tight. It was the Cardinals and Dolphins. Cardinals beat the Dolphins 28 to 27. Looking at this Cardinals offense, Kyler Murray went 26 for 36, 307 yards and 2 touchdowns. On the ground, he had 5 carries for 19 yards. So a fairly efficient day for Kyler Murray. Didn't turn over the ball, and I'm assuming he was probably more confident in his placement, and especially in his receivers. Uh, James Conner was really quiet for the team, only 20 carries for 53 yards and a touchdown. Receiving, though, was where they really shined this past weekend. Trey McBride had 9 receptions for 124 yards, no touchdowns, but Marvin Harrison Jr. showed back up after last week, Kyler Murray complaining about them not getting the ball to him enough. Uh, Marvin Harrison Jr. had 6 receptions for 111 yards and a touchdown. Michael Williams, I've never heard this guy, had their other passing touchdown. So, yeah, on defense, it looked like they sacked Tua once. They didn't really force Tua to turn the ball over. He didn't throw any interceptions, it looks like. So, yeah, an efficient day for this passing Cardinals offense, but they need to find this run defense or this run offense in order to alleviate some of the pressure off of the back of Kyler Murray so he doesn't throw any interceptions or have any turnovers. Looking at this Dolphins offense, Tua, this was his first game back. He went 28 for 38, 234 yards and a touchdown. Rushing, their top rusher was Devon Achane with 10 carries for 98 yards. Raheem Mostert, I believe this was his first game back as well, with 9 carries for 19 yards and 2 touchdowns. So a fairly efficient day for the two returnees of from injury for the Dolphins. Tyreek Hill was questionable for the game, but he ended up playing. He had 6 receptions for 72 yards. Devon Achane had 6 receptions for 50 yards and a touchdown, and Jalen Waddle had 4 receptions for 45 yards. So a fairly efficient day. The defense didn't really get to Kyler at all. So a really tight game. It came to a game-winning field goal, but it was a good game by both teams. The Cardinals just squeak it out and land on top. Next up, we have the Jets-Patriots. Patriots beat the Jets 25-22. This was definitely one of the bigger upsets of the week. Jets are looking less and less likely that they're going to make any push towards the playoffs or any push towards a winning record at all. Patriots played well. Jacoby Brissett eventually came in for Drake May because Drake May eventually suffered a concussion. While he was in, Drake May went 3 for 6, 23 passing yards, and he had 3 carries for 46 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. Jacoby Brissett went 15 for 24, 132 yards, no touchdowns. The bulk of their touchdowns came on the ground, with Ramondre Stevenson having 20 carries for 48 yards and 2 touchdowns. So it's not like this Jets defense got exposed. They were able to shut down their top players, but they just couldn't do enough to win. Kayshon Boutte had 3 receptions for 46 yards. Hunter Henry was right behind him with 5 receptions for 45 yards. Ultimately, I think what really won the Patriots game was that final drive by veteran Jacoby Brissett, just finding the open man and making plays when it mattered most. Looking at the Jets, this was a fairly upsetting outing. Aaron Rodgers went 17 for 28, 233 yards and 2 touchdowns. Didn't turn over the ball at all, so he was safe and he was efficient. Breece Hall had 16 carries for 80 yards, no touchdowns, whereas Braylon Allen had 12 carries for 32 yards and a touchdown. Receiving, Garrett Wilson had 5 receptions for 113 yards. Davante Adams had 4 receptions for 54 yards. And Tyler Conklin had 3 receptions for 42 yards and a touchdown. This defense was able to sack their quarterbacks twice. They didn't force any turnovers. And ultimately, I don't know how the Jets really lost this game. On paper and statistically, it looks like they should have won. But in the end, the Patriots came out on top and upset these Jets. But I don't believe that was the biggest upset of the weekend. No, my good friends. The biggest upset of the weekend was the Browns beating the Ravens 29-24. Looking at the Browns, Jameis Winston was named their starting quarterback. He went 27 for 41, 334 yards and 3 touchdowns on the day. in theory, your quarterback shouldn't be playing well or winning if he's throwing 41 times a game. But if we remember back to when Jameis Winston was starting down at Tampa, he threw at least like 40 times a game for like 16 games straight. Now, he threw a lot of interceptions, but he's probably, as he's become older and sat behind Drew Brees, I feel like he's probably become smarter with his ball placement. Uh, Rushing, their top rusher was Nick Chubb, who had 16 carries for 52 yards. Uh, Receiving, this was a breakout game for wide receiver Cedric Tillman, who had 7 receptions for 99 yards and 2 touchdowns. So I would advise that any fantasy owners, if Cedric Tillman is sitting on your waiver wire, I would suggest picking him up now that Amari Cooper is gone. He's definitely going to be one of Jameis's top targets. Elijah Moore had 8 receptions for 85 yards, and Jerry Jeudy had 5 receptions for 79 yards. And finally, David Njoku had 5 receptions for 61 yards and a touchdown. This defense got to Lamar. It looks like they sacked Lamar 3 times. They didn't turn Lamar over. It didn't look like they got any interceptions, but Jameis didn't turn over the ball either. This was a really solid game. We'll get to the Ravens in a second, but really solid game. If the Browns start stringing together some wins, although they might be 2-6, they might be able to hurt some other teams' chances at making the playoffs and start creating noise in the AFC. I just want to see Jameis play a couple games consistently this way, rather than just one before I get too high on the Browns. Looking at the Ravens, Lamar Jackson went 23 for 38, 289 yards and 2 touchdowns. Rushing, he had 8 carries for 46 yards. Derrick Henry only had 11 carries for 73 yards and a touchdown. I believe they were behind a lot during this game, they handed the ball off a lot less to Derrick Henry, which has been a lot of their success over the past few weeks, was handing the ball off to Derrick Henry or letting Lamar run. But forcing Lamar to pass 38 times is not how you're going to win against any team as the Ravens. Drops plagued their wide receiver room. Zay Flowers, 7 receptions for 115 yards. Isaiah Likely, 4 receptions for 47 yards. Mark Andrews, 5 receptions for 36 yards and a touchdown. And Nelson Agholor with 3 receptions for 36 yards and a touchdown. Drops on both defense and offense plagued this team the other day. Kyle Hamilton dropped a walk-off interception. I believe Lamar threw a pretty bad ball to try to win the game at the end, so I can't even call that a drop. But I believe there was a drop by, I want to say, Rashad Bateman in the end zone for the game-winning touchdown. Overall, this is a pretty bad look for the Ravens. I guess they just got to get themselves together and get themselves ready for their next opponent, who we'll go over in a little bit. But, yeah, Ravens, not a good look. Browns, there's promise. We just got to keep building this momentum forward and prove to the general audience that Jameis Winston could become a starting quarterback again in the league. Whether it's for the Browns or another team, this is him showing to the NFL that he's good enough to be a starting quarterback. Colts, Texans beat the Colts 23-20. Looking at this Texans offense, C.J. Stroud went 25 for 37, 283 yards and a touchdown. On the ground, Joe Mixon went 25 for 102 and a touchdown. Receiving, Stephon Diggs was their top receiver, 5 receptions for 81 yards. We'll get into what happened to him during the game later. Dalton Schultz was their next highest receiver with 4 receptions for 52 yards, and Tank Dell, who had 4 receptions for 35 yards and a touchdown. On defense, they sacked It looks like they sacked Anthony Richardson around 5 times and picked him off at least once. It was a fairly efficient day for CJ Stroud. He's looking fine. He's not looking like his explosive self from last year, but he's still looking like a solid quarterback. Rushing, Joe Mixon has found a lot of success behind this offensive line. Let's see if they can continue this momentum and start to beat, not play bad teams bad, but beat good teams in close games. Looking at the Colts, Anthony Richardson had a putrid day. He went 10 for 32, 175 yards, a passing touchdown, and an interception. Rushing, he had 6 carries for 45 yards. At one point, I believe it was at halftime, Anthony Richardson was 2 for 15 passing, and I believe it was like around 40 yards passing. This is not a good showing, and especially because Anthony Richardson tapped out eventually on I believe it was a second down and goal. He called out because he was too tired and couldn't keep going. This is not really a good look, and it was already announced that Joe Flacco will be taking over as starting quarterback next week and for the foreseeable future. I said this around the time that he got drafted, and I've continued to say this, that he might become one of the biggest busts because he's so raw. And Shane Steichen, although a good coach and a good coordinator, was able to shape Jalen Hurts into a better quarterback. Anthony Richardson is so raw of a quarterback. He's better off playing running back or wide receiver with his athleticism rather than throwing the ball like he is. He's throwing it poorly. He has like one of the worst completion percentages since 2000. I believe out of like 225 quarterbacks, I think he's like 222 on the worst completion percentages in the NFL. Rushing, Jonathan Taylor went 20 for 105 and 1 touchdown. Receiving, Josh Downs led the team with 4 receptions for 109 yards and a touchdown. So let's talk about this. I wanted to have this discussion. Anthony Richardson needs to get it through that no quarterback can tap out. And we're seeing this right now with the Eagles. The quarterback defines how the rest of the team plays. If the team sees you tap out, the team is going to give up. He tapped out, and I think they had to get a field goal because he didn't, because they ended up stalling out in the red zone. If in a one-score game where if they got a touchdown, they would have won, if you tap out, that shows to the rest of the team that you're giving up. If Tom Brady or Peyton Manning would have tapped out because they were too tired, because the defense was constantly hitting them, which is a problem in of itself. But if those two historic quarterbacks would have tapped out, do you think that we would have the same respect for them as we do now? They led their teams by example. I don't even know. I'm just like slightly pissed off because we see it now in the NFL where quarterbacks are throwing less and using their legs more. That's perfectly fine, but you have to condition yourself to be able to do that. You can't tap out. You are the lifeline of the team, and because of that, you can't show any weakness because you are the leader of the team. You represent what the mentality and how motivated the rest of the team are. We see that with the Eagles now. The Eagles right now are stringing together wins with Jalen Hurts playing confident and playing well. And you don't see Jalen Hurts tapping out. Now, it's not just Jalen Hurts that's playing well. It's the rest of the team around him because they're motivated by seeing their captain, their leader, playing well and taking the messages he's giving them. If Anthony Richardson cannot do that, he needs to just find his way on a bench somewhere and Just be a permanent backup, just in case things go wrong. I said this earlier this season when they switched Anthony Richardson back in for Joe Flacco. They should have just rode Joe Flacco till the wheels fell off. And I feel the same way now, and at least they're taking our advice, the public's advice now. Not a good look for the Colts, not a good look for Anthony Richardson. We're going to see what really happens to the kid after this season, whether they try to move on or whether they try to give him one more year. I don't know what you do with him at this point, but it's more of a wait and see for the Colts. Next up, I'm not even going to touch this game, really. Lions-Titans. Let's see. Titans played horribly. Mason Rudolph was their starting quarterback. He went 22 for 38, 266 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. Rushing, Tony Pollard led the team with 20 rushes, 94 yards. They only threw the ball to Calvin Ridley, who had 10 receptions for 143 yards. This is what happens when you get rid of your number one wide receiver that's like historically great, and DeAndre Hopkins is now you only have a number two wide receiver in Calvin Ridley to feed the ball to. So they will only cover that guy. Jared Goff, it's not like he had an amazing game. He went 12 for 15, 85 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He was just efficient. And in this blowout loss, he didn't have to throw that much. Where they did their damage was on the ground, with Jahmyr Gibbs having 11 carries for 127 yards and a touchdown. David Montgomery with 9 carries for 33 yards and a touchdown. And David Montgomery also was 1 for 1 in passing for 3 yards and a touchdown. Overall, it was more of a blowout. They were able to pick off Mason Rudolph. I'm not even going to touch the implications of this anymore. The Lions continue to be red hot. Next up, we have a kind of controversial game. We have the Falcons beating the Tampa Bay Buccaneers 31-26. Obviously, with the Buccaneers, it was going to hurt losing Mike Evans for a couple of weeks and Chris Godwin for the rest of the season. Baker went 37 for 50, 330 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Again, they're losing games that Baker's turning over the ball multiple times. He's looking less efficient every week. Bucky Irving was their top rusher with 9 carries for 44 yards, and Rachaad White had 6 carries for 29 yards. Obviously, Baker's going to look worse the less they're able to run the ball. So I can't really completely blame Baker, but he still needs to be smarter with the ball. Cade Otton was their top receiver, having 9 receptions for 81 yards and 2 touchdowns. Rachaad White had 5 receptions for 38 yards and a touchdown. And Bucky Irving had 7 receptions for 40 yards. It's obvious to me that Baker's not trusting a lot of his other wide receivers that are below Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and Cade Otton and his 2 running backs. So, yeah, this is going to be a rough stretch for the Bucs, and they might start to fall out of playoff contention if they can't get it together. Looking at the Falcons, Kirk Cousins went 23 for 29, 276 yards, 4 touchdowns. Bijan Robinson led the team in rushing with 13 carries for 63 yards. Bijan's been having a little bit more of a quieter year. He hasn't been rushing for as much as he did last year. In receiving, Kyle Pitts had 4 receptions for 92 yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, arguably, one of those 2 touchdowns probably should have been called back because Antoine Winfield knocked the ball out of his hands before it passed the goal line. And why you don't secure the ball while you're running with it is beyond me with Kyle Pitts. But, I'll let him do his thing. Overall, the ball probably should have been a touchback since it went out of the side of the end zone. Anyway, they were able to tear the Bucs defense apart through the air. Darnell Mooney, 4 receptions for 86 yards and a touchdown. Bijan Robinson, 7 receptions for 43 yards and a touchdown. Quiet week for Drake London, who had a bigger week back at Seattle. He has 44 receptions for 34 yards. They were able to turn Baker over twice, with A.J. Terrell getting one and Jesse Bates getting the other. Other than that, it was kind of a boring game. Besides the controversial call at the end of the closer to the end of the game, it was kind of a boring game. Next, looking at the Chargers Saints. Chargers beat the Saints 63-8. This was a good old spanking right here by the Chargers. Justin Herbert went 20 for 32, 279 yards, 2 passing touchdowns. J.K. Dobbins had 17 carries for 57 yards and a touchdown. Their top receiver was Ladd McConkey with 6 receptions for 111 yards and 2 touchdowns. I know he was questionable at the beginning of the game, but it looks like he played. Their next highest receiver was Joshua Palmer, with 2 receptions for 72 yards. Other than that, it looks like they were able to sack. I guess it was Ritter who was starting, or Rattler who was starting. It looks like they got to Rattler a little bit, but besides that, it was a pretty good physical and well-coached game by the Chargers. It looks like they had 3 different quarterbacks pass at one point. He had Spencer Rattler, who went 12 for 24, 156 touchdowns, or 156 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions. Jake Haener came in eventually, went 9 for 17, 122 yards, same with touchdowns and interceptions. And Taysom Hill is back, I guess. He went 1 for 1 for 3 passing yards. Alvin Kamara really got shut down. He only had 10 carries for 67 yards. And receiving, Chris Olave was their top receiver with 8 receptions for 107 yards. Alvin Kamara was their next closest with 6 receptions for 55 yards. This defense was able to get to Justin Herbert, it looks like 3 times, but besides that, they weren't able to force any turnovers. Moving on, we have another kind of easy, quick game. Bills beat the Seahawks 31-10. Josh Allen looking like the MVP. Well, he's up there in the MVP conversation. I wouldn't say he's a front runner right now. I feel like that would be Jared Goff. But he's up there in the conversation. Josh Allen went 24 for 34, 283 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. James Cook was their top rusher, who went 17 for 111 yards and 2 touchdowns. It's nice to see James Cook back. He's been quiet the past couple of weeks, so it's nice to see him get re-energized and going again. Ray Davis had 6 carries for 29 yards. Josh Allen had 7 carries for 25 yards. Receiving, their top receiver was Khalil Shakir with 9 receptions for 107 yards. Keon Coleman had 5 receptions for 70 yards and a touchdown. Amari Cooper acquired a week after making an explosive statement at Buffalo last week. He only had 1 reception for 3 yards. Defensively, it looks like they were able to get to Geno once, and were able to turn him over once as well. Quickly looking at the Seahawks offense, Geno went 21 for 29, 212 yards and an interception. Rushing, he was their top rusher. Geno Smith was their top rusher, so that's probably their biggest problem right now. Geno went 5 carries for 16 yards, when Kenneth Walker had 9 carries for 12 yards. JSN was their top receiver, having 6 receptions for 69 yards. I don't see DK Metcalf. He must not have played during this game. Tyler Lockett went 1 for 9. It was not a good day for this Seahawks offense. And I remember seeing Geno after the game saying that it was more of an away game, which is really weird for Seattle because for so many years they've been like so dominant at home because of their crowd. But I'm questioning whether the Seattle faithful are starting to lose faith in this Seattle team. But I guess we're gonna see how that plays out over the next couple of home games. Next, looking at this Very overrated and very sloppy game. We have the Chargers, or not Chargers. We have the Commanders beating the Bears 18-15. Bears, looking at the offense, Caleb Williams went 10 for 24, 131 passing yards. DeAndre Swift went 18 for 129 and a touchdown. Receiving, Rome Odunze was their top receiver with 3 receptions for 41 yards. Keenan Allen had 2 receptions for 39 yards. DJ Moore had 2 receptions for 27 yards. And Cole Kmet had 1 reception for 14 yards. Defensively, they were able to sack Jaden Daniel and hit him in his ribs a couple of times. I thought I saw him take a couple of shots at his ribs. Overall, a really sloppy game for this Bears team. And same on the other side. It wasn't great. Jaden Daniels went 21 for 38, 326 yards and a touchdown. And on the ground, he had 8 carries for 52 yards. Brian Robinson had 16 carries for 65 yards. And receiving, Terry McLaurin had 5 receptions for 125 yards. Zach Ertz was right behind Terry McLaurin with 7 receptions for 77 yards, and Noah Brown right behind him with 3 receptions for 73 yards and a touchdown. Defensively, they were able to get to Caleb twice and weren't able to turn him over. Overall, this was a really sloppy game, and it came down to a Hail Mary pass. So realistically, the Bears probably should have won this. But where is he? I'm trying to find the guy that blew it. Oh, Tyreek Stevenson. Yeah, he was celebrating before the pass even got off. The guys were 40 yards down the field before he turned around and started to go to his position for the Hail Mary. And the Commanders won it off of that Hail Mary because he tipped up the ball and it just popped right out to, I believe it was Noah Brown who caught the ball. So yeah, really sloppy game, and as much as everybody hyped it up, it was really bad actually in my opinion. Like neither team could get anything going. So yeah, a little bit upsetting. I was expecting more. I guess the Hail Mary's cool and all, but it was way short. And if it wasn't for the pop-up, the Commanders definitely wouldn't have won that. Looking at the next game, we have Chiefs Raiders. Chiefs beat the Raiders 27-20. Looking at the stats, Patrick Mahomes went 27 for 38, 226 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. Continues to turn over the ball through the air. Kareem Hunt was their top rusher with 21 carries for 59 yards and a touchdown. A little bit concerning that he couldn't get anything else going with 21 carries, but I guess their game plan was to try to bomb this Raiders defense over the top. Travis Kelce was finally their leading receiver. It was about time he showed up. He had 10 receptions for 90 yards and a touchdown. Xavier Worthy was right behind him with 4 receptions for 37 yards and a touchdown. DeAndre Hopkins, although only 2 receptions for 29 yards, both came on big third down conversions, and it was like third and long too. So I would expect him to start to pick up, especially maybe in the next 2 weeks. We might see him to start to produce more, especially for fantasy, but we'll see. This Chiefs defense was able to get to Minshew a couple of times. It looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, but weren't able to turn him over. Gardner Minshew went 24 for 30, 209 yards and 2 touchdowns. So not a horrible day through the air, but rushing was horrid for this Raiders offense. Their top running back, Alexander Mattison, had 14 carries for 15 yards. Yeah, that's not good. Top receiver, Brock Bowers, had 5 receptions for 58 yards, no touchdowns. Jacoby Myers had 6 receptions for 52 yards and a touchdown. And DJ Turner had 4 receptions for 28 yards and a touchdown. This Raiders defense was able to turn over Patrick Mahomes once, but after talking a lot of smack, especially during the offseason, they weren't able to hold up their end of the bargain. Uh, yeah, Raiders sitting at 2-6, whereas the Chiefs are 7-0. I would try to pick your battles, especially against a legendary quarterback like Patrick Mahomes. I wouldn't piss him off, but now you've poked the bull. So have fun dealing with that for the next couple of years when people try to tell you guys about that. Looking at the uh, next game, we have Broncos Panthers. Broncos beat the Panthers 28-14. Bryce Young, well, I'm going to go through this quick. Bryce Young went 24 for 37, 224, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Chuba Hubbard, 15 carries for 56 yards. Their top receiver was Jalen Coker, who had 4 receptions for 78 yards and a touchdown. Looking at this Broncos offense, Bo Nix, another efficient day, went 28 for 37, 284 yards and 3 touchdowns. Rushing, they were really quiet. Their top rusher, Javonte Williams, had 17 carries for 44 yards. Bo Nix on the ground, though, had 5 carries for 4 yards and a touchdown. Receiving, their top receiver was obviously Courtland Sutton, who had 8 receptions for 100 yards, with Adam Troutman being right behind him with 4 receptions for 85 yards and a touchdown. Not really going to cover that game much more anyway, so yeah. Another really sloppy and bad game was the 49ers beating the Cowboys 30-24. Looking at this Cowboys offense, Dak Prescott went 25 for 38, 243 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Zeke had 10 carries for 34 yards and a touchdown, and receiving, CeeDee Lamb had a pretty good game. For everybody else that sucked, CeeDee Lamb had a pretty good game. He had 13 receptions for 146 yards and 2 touchdowns. 49ers, Brock Purdy went 18 for 26, 260 yards and a touchdown. Rushing, their top rusher, because Jordan Mason went down, was Isaac Guerendo, who had 14 carries for 85 yards and a touchdown, which is proof that any running back put behind that offensive line and that style of offense can really thrive. Their top receiver was George Kittle, who had 6 receptions for 168 yards and a touchdown, followed by Debo, who had 4 receptions for 71 yards, and Ricky Pearsall, who had 4 receptions for 38 yards. Overall, very sloppy game. 49ers go to 4-4, whereas the Cowgirls fall to 3-4 on the season. And finally, Monday Night Football, we have Steelers beating the Giants 26-18. Looking at this Giants offense, Daniel Jones went 24 for 38, 264 yards and an interception. I believe that was a game-sealing interception too. Their top rusher, Tyrone Tracy Jr., had 20 carries for 145 yards and a touchdown. So good day on the ground and through the air, especially after coming off of that waffle stomping by the Eagles. Darius Slayton was their top receiver with 4 receptions for 108 yards. Whereas Malik Neighbors, they tried to force feed him a little bit, went 7 receptions for 71 yards. This Steelers offense, though, is looking fairly efficient under Russell Wilson, like it was under Justin Fields. Went 20 for 20. Russell Wilson went 20 for 28, 278 yards and a touchdown. Najee Harris, another good, productive day, had 19 carries for 114 yards. Receiving, their top receiver was George Pickens, who had 4 receptions for 74 yards. And Van Jefferson right behind him with 4 receptions for 62 yards. All right, with that recap of this past weekend's games out of the way, looking at some quick notes around the league. Stefon Diggs was announced yesterday to be out for the rest of the season with an ACL tear. This could have monumental implications for the Texans and the AFC as a whole, because now the Texans are going to have 2 good receivers, Tank Dell and Nico Collins, and I think they still have John Mechie too. So it's not like it overly hurts, but it's just a little bit shocking that they traded for him, and now now when they really need him, when everything starts to get more tough, which is in the second half of the season, they're not going to have that safety blanket that's been leading their team in receptions and receiving yards. Russell Wilson is balling out in Pittsburgh, and everybody's wondering if he's the guy. I think he is, at least for this season. Have Justin Fields sit behind him and re-sign Justin Fields to the contract. Let Russell Wilson walk and become a bridge guy for another team in the offseason, in my opinion. Cam Robinson, offensive tackle for the Jaguars, got traded to the Vikings after the Vikings offensive tackle Darisaw was injured in the Rams-Vikings game. Panthers send Deontay Johnson to the Ravens. Hopefully this will fix their wide receiver dropping problems, especially that they had against the Browns. Jameis Winston is a potential future starter in the league in my eyes. If he continues to play the same way, I feel like he's definitely going to earn the Browns starting job for next season, or hell, maybe somewhere else. As the trade deadline approaches, I expect teams like the Jaguars, Lions, Texans, and Chiefs to continue to make moves in order to improve their team before the playoffs. All right. So looking at the standings real quick for around the league, Bills sit atop the AFC East, Chiefs atop the AFC West, Steelers atop the AFC North, which is really tight, Texans atop the AFC South, which is becoming less tight of a race. Commanders are still on top of the NFC East. Cardinals, 49ers, and Seahawks are all tied for first in the NFC West, with the Rams being right behind them, and the Lions being atop the NFC North, and finally the Falcons being atop the NFC South. Moving on, let's do this real quickly. I won't give scores, but here are my picks for next week. I think the Texans, even though suffering an injury of Stephon Diggs, are going to beat this downtrodden Jets team. The Falcons will probably beat the Cowboys at home. This Bills team is probably going to blow the brakes off of the Dolphins. Same with the Bengals against the Raiders. This Chargers team is probably going to beat the Browns, but I wouldn't be too surprised if the Browns beat the Chargers. This Patriots team is probably going to beat this Titans team. The Commanders are definitely going to beat the Giants. The Saints are going to beat the Panthers, definitely. Though it'll probably be a tight game than most people think. The Ravens will probably resurge and beat these Broncos. They'll probably be trickier than most people think again. The Bears will probably beat the Cardinals. The Eagles will most likely beat the Jaguars. I will be at that game, so I'm excited to see it in person. This Red Hot Lions team is probably going to beat this injured Packers team. The Rams will probably beat the Seahawks. I believe the Vikings will most likely beat give me the Colts. I think the Colts with Joe Flacco might beat the Vikings. And I feel like the Chiefs will definitely beat the Buccaneers on Monday Night Football. So with that being said, I want to thank you all for listening to this episode. Please, like I said earlier, please like and subscribe, and follow us on Twitter for any updates. With all that being said, remember to have a good day, and go Birds.